You ever have one of those nights where everything feels just a little off? Not quite wrong, but not quite wrong, but not quite right either. That's where it all started for me. I was never one to believe in the paranormal. Ghost stories, creepy urban legends, all of that. I figured it was just a way for people to scare themselves, to feel something different from their mundane lives. But what happened to me last year? Yeah, it changed that. It was the beginning of December, the kind of cold that bites through your jacket and leaves your face numb. I had just moved back to the town where I grew up, not for any sentimental reason, but because life had beaten me down, and I needed to retreat somewhere familiar. It was the kind of small town that always felt like it was stuck in time, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and not much ever really happens. I found a cheap place to rent. A small, 2-story house at the edge of town, near the woods. It wasn't anything special, but it was enough for me. Quiet, isolated. I figured I could use the peace. The house had a kind of charm to it. Old hardwood floors, a fireplace that barely worked, and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. It felt worn, but not in a bad way. Just lived in. The first few nights were normal. I'd make myself some tea, sit by the window, and watch the trees sway in the wind. I didn't have much else to do. It was almost too quiet out there. The kind of quiet where you notice every little sound, creaking floorboards, the wind brushing against the walls, the distant hoot of an owl. All things that should felt comforting but instead felt just a little too sharp, a little too deliberate. Then, one night, something changed. It was around 3:15, I remember because I looked at the clock the moment I heard it. A knock. Just a single, firm knock at the door. I jolted awake, my heart pounding. I wasn't expecting anyone, and who the hell would be knocking on my door in the middle of the night? I sat up listening, straining to hear anything else. The house was silent. The kind of silence that presses down on you, making the air feel heavier. I waited, but there was nothing more. No footsteps, no voices, just that single knock still echoing in my mind. I convinced myself it was a dream. Maybe I hadn't even heard it. I mean, weird things happen when you're half asleep, right? Still, I was rattled. I didn't sleep much after that. Just lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for another sound. The next morning, everything seemed fine. The day passed uneventfully, and by the time night rolled around, I had almost forgotten about the knock. But something about the air felt different that night, heavier. I went to bed, telling myself that I needed sleep, that I was just being paranoid, but then, like clockwork, it happened again. 3:15 a.m. Knock. This time, I was wide awake. I shot up in bed, my heart racing. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was knocking at my door in the dead of night, but why? And who? I threw on a hoodie and grabbed my phone, the light from the screen casting an eerie glow across the room. Slowly, I made my way to the front door, my pulse pounding in my ears. I could barely breathe, a knot forming in the pit of my stomach. I reached the door, hesitated for a moment, and then pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing. There was no one there. I felt a wave of cold air sweep over me, and I shivered. My hand hovered over the doorknob, and against all better judgment, I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Nothing but the freezing wind and the sound of the trees rustling in the dark. I stepped out onto the porch, looking left and right, but the street was empty. No footprints in the snow, no signs that anyone had been there. Just the lingering echo of that knock. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I asked my neighbor, an old man who'd lived in the town for as long as anyone could remember, if he had heard anything. He gave me a strange look, one I couldn't quite read, and then shook his head. "You're living in the old Miller house, right?" he asked, his voice low and gruff. "Yeah," I replied, curious about the shift in his tone. "Why?" He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Ain't nobody been living in that house for a long time. At least, not without things happening." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He gave me a look that was both pitying and filled with warning. "You'll figure it out soon enough. Just don't open the door." With that cryptic message, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, more confused than before. I spent the rest of the day on edge, my mind racing with possibilities. Had the house's previous owners experienced the same thing? Was there something more to that knock than just some late-night prank? That night, I couldn't relax. I paced around the house, checking the windows, making sure the doors were locked. I even tried to stay up past 3:15, but somewhere around 2:45 exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. And then, just like before, it happened. 3:15 a.m. Knock. This time, I didn't get up. I didn't go to the door. I just lay there, my entire body tense, listening. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. Every second felt like an hour. And then... knock. It was louder this time. Closer. I held my breath, squeezing my eyes shut, trying to convince myself it wasn't happening. But it was. Knock. My heart pounded in my chest. I could feel the presence of something, someone, just outside my door. It was waiting for me to open it. It wanted me to open it. The next morning, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. All I could think about was the knock. I started to dread the nights, knowing that as soon as the clock hit 3:15, it would happen again. And it did. Every night. Without fail. By the end of the week, I was losing it. I couldn't think straight, couldn't focus on anything but that damn knock. I even tried leaving the house at night, staying at a motel a few towns over. But even there, at exactly 3:15, I heard it. Knock. It followed me. I went back to the old man, desperate for answers. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I can't take it anymore." He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "It's the house. Or rather, what's in the house. It's been waiting for someone to come along and let it out." "Let it out?" I asked, confused. He nodded. "That knock. It's not trying to get in. It's trying to get out." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What? What is it?" He didn't answer, just turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, more terrified than ever. That night, I barricaded the door. I put furniture in front of it, nailed it shut, anything to keep that knock from reaching me. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever was knocking didn't need the door. It just needed me to hear it. And right on cue, 3:15 a.m. came. Knock. I stayed in bed, blankets pulled up to my chin, trying to block it out. Knock. The sound echoed through the house, louder this time, angrier. Knock. It was inside now. I could hear it, footsteps dragging across the floor, coming closer and closer to my bedroom. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The air grew colder, the presence more oppressive. The air grew colder, the presence more oppressive. And then, just outside my bedroom door, knock. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It was right there. The door creaked open. I don't remember what happened next. I must have blacked out because when I woke up, it was morning and the house was eerily quiet. Everything seemed normal. Normal. The door to the attic, though, it was ajar. I don't live in that house anymore. I left the next day, packed up everything I could carry, and never looked back. But sometimes late at night, even now, when everything is still and the world is quiet, I swear I hear it. Knock. 3:15 a.m. and I know still waiting.